Now let's turn to our big story and a discussion about money and politics. And no matter where you live, you have a chance to contribute to your favorite candidate's campaign. But let me ask you something. Do you? For most of us, the answer is no. Why not? Well, it's because most of us feel like the relatively small amount that we can give will make no difference compared to the big checks that corporations or the millionaires can write. That in turn fuels our feeling of being stuck on the outside, that we can't really make a difference in the political system because who are the candidates going to listen to? Us little folks or the big ones who write the big checks? And a poll by the nonpartisan Pew Foundation in 2018 showed that more than 70% of Americans believe people who write those big checks do have more influence than the people who write the little ones. Election officials in Portland are very aware of that belief.
So polls have been showing that over 90% of Americans don't believe the government works in their interest, that it works only in the interests of large campaign donors.
That's Susan Matei, the director of something called the Small Donor Elections for the city of Portland. I'd never heard of it, so if you haven't, don't feel bad. But she is running a program that I think is fascinating and really worth our time tonight. We've blasted the city for its many failings, but this might be a bright spot of success. And you should know about it no matter where you live, because your local elections folks should really look at this and consider doing it. Here we go. In 2016, the Portland City Council approved a change in the rules for financing campaigns for positions like city council or mayor or auditor. The idea was to get those big check writers out and the small donors in. The city set up a system that is optional for the candidates. If they agree to take part, they get free money from the city for their campaign, and then they have to live by some strict rules. They do not have to take part if they don't want to, but then they lose out on the free money. And here's how that works. A candidate declares they're running, let's say for city council seat number 2, for example. They begin gathering campaign donations. They need to get at least $5 from 250 different people who live in the city of Portland. Then once they hit that amount, they qualify for an incredible 9-to-1 match on the first $20 of each donation. Did you get that? 9-to-1.
Any Portlander who gives a participating candidate up to $20 gets their contribution matched 9-to-1. So if you give, we like to say the city adds a 0. So if you give a candidate 20, the city matches at 9-to-1, that's 180, becomes $200 for the candidate. In exchange, that candidate has to, first of all, collect a lot of small contributions from a lot of Portlanders to prove that they have enough public support to be worthy of the matching funds. And they also have to agree to campaign finance rules, so they can only take $250 from an individual per election. And outside of some small limits for in-kind contributions that they can take from, organizations, they can't take, contributions from like entities and whatnot.
So there's about 30 places in the country that have programs like this, but I think Portland's might be the most aggressive. Again, here's how it works. City council collect contributions from 250 different people. Folks running for mayor need to collect 750 individual contributions, and not everyone loves it. For example, during the last election, our mayor, Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler, did not take part. But back to the current election. Once the candidate qualifies, the first $20 that they get from any Portland resident gets them that 9-to-1 match. People can give more than $20, but it's only the first 20 that's matched. So if someone gives $10, the city kicks in another 90. If someone gives $20, the city kicks in another 180. Each candidate can only get a maximum of $200,000 from the city for a primary election. Once they hit that limit, they can still fundraise, of course, but there's no more city match. Not surprisingly, in the last election, the candidates who used this system loved it.
So actually, our first election cycle was the 2020 election cycle, and afterward we did user research. We've talked to people who gave to candidates, the candidates themselves, their staff, their volunteers, and what we heard was that this really freed them up from having to make a bunch of phone calls to raise a lot of money, and instead they just went straight out and were talking to voters. That raising small contributions just became part of meeting people and hearing about their concerns and what they are looking for government to do. So they felt much more like they were campaigning and talking to the people and not just raising money.
And I wonder if the people who were giving the donations felt like they were playing a role and that their small amount actually could make a difference.
I mean, that's almost a word for word what we heard, that people were excited to learn that their $5, $10, $20 wasn't getting overwhelmed by a small number of large contributions. The program's goal is to make sure that it's Portlanders who are funding our elections, so that once people are elected, they are beholden to all Portlanders, not a small number of large campaign donors. And what people who know about the program do feel like finally, they do matter, and that they will be listened to.
Sounds pretty cool, huh? In the past, the average contribution for city elections was about $1,000. But in 2020, when this new system was used, the average dropped to less than $100. That gave the people writing the little checks a much bigger voice. But wait, there's more. The city is tracking lots of data and presenting it on a website that you can use and see where the candidates are getting their money. You can get there by going to openelectionsportland.org.
So you go to the dates section and you type in from the beginning of the election cycle, which was December 18th, 2020. And that filters all of the data visualizations to this election cycle. So you can see this map, and the dots are according to the size of the contribution. And so what you see is that there are no big dots. There used to be very big dots. And then you can also hover on them and it'll tell you which campaign received how much and how much of a match they received. All candidates who've raised at least $4,000 this cycle are participating in the program. And then you can see how many contributions they received from how many donors, the median contribution, total private contributions, and total matching funds. And then they can see what types of donors they've received money from, and then how much of those contributions are from very small donors to larger donors. 100 to 250 is the mostly the largest donor. They can take small amount of in-kinds that are larger than that, and a small amount of seed money that's a little larger than that, but that's all. And then you can see if it came from Portland, from Oregon to outside of Portland versus out of state. And you can see that Portlanders are dominating the elections now. Individual donors, no entities, businesses, etc., are dominating the elections, and that it's virtually 100% of it's coming from donors who give $250 or less.
Now, I might be a bit wonky, but I think this stuff is fascinating. It's a look at how elections can be run with everyone taking part, not just the folks with lots of extra money. It's important, and we'll be talking about this a lot more as we get closer to the primary election in May.